All right, I have by my clock that it's time to get rolling. So are y'all ready?
Yes.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Lucy Chambers, and I'm president of the EBA, the Episcopal Booksellers Association. On behalf of EBA, I welcome you to our authors series. I'd like to offer a particularly warm welcome to Dr. Kate Bowler, who will speak with us about her latest book, No Cure for Being Human and Other Truths I Need to Hear. Our moderator this evening is the Reverend Anna Ostenso V. Moore. Anna is the priest associate for family ministry at St. Mark's Episcopal Cathedral in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the author of 2 books. Today is a baptism day, and we gather at this table. So Anna will open our time together with a prayer and then introduce our featured author, Dr. Kate Bowler, and begin the conversation. At the end, there'll be time for you to ask questions or share your thoughts in the chat. We're honored and delighted to have these 2 thoughtful and respected women with us who are both so dedicated to helping us focus on what really matters. So Kate and Anna, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Let us pray. God, who is with us, we thank you for gathering us in this way this evening. In our questions, in our conversation, in our thoughts, may you be present, and may this be a thin space for us to wonder about you, where you are in our lives, the joys, the suffering, the everyday. We lift this time up to you in your name. Amen. It is also my honor to introduce Dr. Kate Bowler, who I believe probably doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyway. Kate is a historian, a professor at Duke, the wife of Tobin, the mother of Zach. She's a self-described incurable optimist. On her popular podcast, Everything Happens, she hosts conversations that our world needs. She talks with people about what they have learned in difficult times and why it is hard to speak frankly about suffering. She's also a best-selling author, including the books Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Truths I Need to Hear, and the book that we are here to talk about tonight, No Cure for Being Human. No Cure for Being Human is one of my favorite books of the year. In it, Kate grapples with her diagnosis of stage 4 cancer at age 35, her ambition, her hopes as a parent, her faith, as she tries to come to terms with limitations in a culture that promises us everything. She asks the question that we all ask at times: how do you move forward with a life you didn't choose? Her writing is deeply personable and relatable. While I was reading it, I recognized myself, my faith, my wrestling in a way that made me feel like I was not alone, but I was in good company. And it is a joy to be in your company tonight, Kate.
Oh, my word. What a nice introduction. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you, Lucy. And thank you so much, Episcopalian Bookseller. Is there a better combination of Episcopalians plus books? I'm so thrilled to be
all of
with
my
you
favorite
all.
things.
Exactly. That's right. You add wine and I am
Yep.
converted. Absolutely.
Side of ice cream. Well, my copy of your book, No Cure for Being Human, arrived in one of those deep lull energy moments. It was the late afternoon. At the time, my son was in a phase in which he had to eat every 2 hours, no regard for my husband and my sleep schedule. And like, I'm just going to glance at it. I'm going to be a responsible adult and I'll read it when I have some brain power. But I picked it up and I couldn't put it down. I found myself an hour later at dinner reading from it to my husband, especially the scene in the hospital in which you pull off all the self-help books off of the shelf. I could relate. But then I found myself reading it later to my clergy group. My congregation has heard me preach it, so it is a wonderful book. And one of the things that I'm drawn to is your tenderness in everyday life, and how you combine humor and truthfulness about grief. And even though your story is unique, it feels so relatable, especially because we've all experienced limitations at times. I wonder how you decide, because your writing is so deeply personal, what you share and what you don't share.
Mm, yeah. Well, I guess because it came out of the heart of a problem, which is I wanted so much to be a faithful person, but so many of the things I wanted to say out loud didn't feel faithful. They
Mhm.
felt angry or ugly, or at least things that made people feel really uncomfortable at parties. And I had, really fallen in love with the Christianity because I recognized it to be true, like it had rung some bells in
Mhm.
me and I could feel it echoing. But then and I was pretty, I mean, not to boast, but I was like pretty good at it from like a gentle,
Yeah.
disinterested kind of version. As a historian, I would write these very long, very footnoted accounts. And I was hoping I was trying to become this gentle, dispassionate observer of truths I thought were very interesting but difficult. I always gravitated toward things that other people found a little silly, like
Mm.
televangelism, mega churches, the questions, the hard parts of faith healing, and then sort of the Tammy Faye type
Mhm.
evangelical women. And the whole time I wanted to be a compassionate observer, but I don't think any of that really was anything like the kind of wrestling I experienced the second that I was very, very sick and that it was very likely that I would die. That it was like, I remember it being September and that I knew that it would be my last fall. And I thought, I don't really know how to talk about this,
Mm.
like
Mhm.
how angry I am, how scared I am. Will it still be okay? And I would say I turned to memoir to practice learning to share things that frankly I couldn't say out loud, and that's why I wrote them
Mm.
down. But even as I hope that I've grown as an author, I find myself maybe even saying what I would consider more embarrassing things, because at least for me, that I wrote Everything Happens for a Reason and Other Lies I've Loved in only about a month and a half, because I thought for sure like that I was
Mhm.
dying and I wanted to say, how do you say anything true about God when it doesn't feel fair and none of
Mhm.
this is good math? And but I also was a bit tidy, because everyone in that story needed to come off very well, because I thought that that would be the thing I would leave with my family. And this book, I was like, oh, I'm gonna live for a bit longer. So I said some harder things. For instance, about the fact that I've had very poor medical care. I never
Mhm.
would have been able to say
Mhm.
that before. Or that sometimes when you have problems that persist, it's the people that love you that distance themselves from you. And I don't think I was ready to say any of that before.
Mhm. Mhm. In talking to people who deal with chronic diagnoses, I think you named a truth that is so rarely named, and that is a gift, as well as struggles with medical care. Um, you touched on this a little bit in your answer, but up until reading your book, I always thought of the prosperity gospel as something that did not impact my life. I do not live in $1 million home. I don't believe that I will if I pray harder or act better, if I had gotten less penalties in hockey. Um, but after I read your book, I started to realize these beliefs show up in all of our faith. They
Mhm.
show up in our culture of the American dream, and in our self-help culture now, which is huge. What I appreciated about your writing is how you both critiqued the prosperity gospel that just says, pray harder, do less wrong, and you'll be good. God will reward you.
Mhm.
And love the people that you worked with, that you worshiped alongside of and studied with. What drew you to that gospel, the prosperity gospel, and how do you hold that critique and love hand in hand?
Mm. Yeah, I don't think I would have known this going in because I had assumed that it was the caricature of the greedy televangelist and the the Kenneth Copeland with the private jet, or this never stop smiling Joel Osteen, and that there was like an inherent hypocrisy with the performance of that much optimism and, whatever felt true about the world. And I spent most of my 20s studying televangelists and traveling around to visit mega churches. And I saw some wonderfully ridiculous things. Like, do not get me wrong, I saw eagles released into indoor buildings to fly around to symbolize victory. And I saw rivers that were, the center aisle. And I saw like an enormous aquarium that was like mostly the size of 2 stories, where it just said, "Behold, and I will make you fishers of men." But I was very theologically confused by the shark, the enormous shark I could see. And I was like, where does that fit? How do we work that in? So there was all kinds of the sort of deliciousness of heresy. But heresy is almost always like idolatry, just a little quarter turn away from a thing that we also want and need to be true. And in their version, the belief that God will reward you with health and wealth comes from a belief that God is a good God. And then like what God would, when their child asks for bread, give them a stone. And like it's an argument that works backwards from the character of God. And we can learn a lot when we don't miss the heart of that story, which is that wouldn't it make a little more sense, honestly, if God had set like up a system so that righteous people would succeed? I'm laughing because I want it every day. And sometimes I think the inscrutability of God is one of our deepest sorrows. Is, God, couldn't you have made your kingdom here and not yet, like a tiny bit more obvious to make it feel less like we have to wait so long to know the goodness, to know the fairness, to know the heart of what the future that God promises is going to be like. So I think just believing it to be kind of a quarter turn helped me see that they were able to see things that I couldn't. They were very good. I spent years with prosperity believers, and I loved their belief that God loved the intimacy of the details of their life, that they could see God's work in little things that I might have ignored. And also that they were very stubborn about believing that their problems were also God's desires, that their healing was a tragedy, and that their lack of family togetherness, like that they weren't, I don't mean this in an unkind way about the main line, because I love the Methodist churches to which I am devoted. But sometimes it feels like we're so polite that we tolerate so much tragedy in each other's lives. And I always felt like I wanted so much for people to pray for me, but then the organ song had come and people were ready to be done because it was 12:05. So there's something about the gutsiness of that, of being around them, that I think was good for my soul.
And I am grateful to hear that, because I think so often it's easy to caricature. And in our ideal selves, in our perfect world, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could all try to get to the heart and the goodness?
Yeah.
I mean, we all have our hypocrisies and our errors of ways. So if we all were looking at the goodness, life would be amazing. And I hear that part about that desire for God to be fair, that desire for the kingdom to be here and now, rather than something we still hope for, because sometimes hope is about all we can do on a day. And I heard in your wrestling, in your writing, I heard you wrestling, and I wondered, one of the simplest and hardest questions for me to answer is, why do you pray? And I wondered what that answer is for you.
Now it makes me want to ask you what you say when parishioners say, why do we pray? It's such a wonderful question. Do you have a shorthand that you reach for?
A shorthand is to be in communication with God, to be open to where God is moving in the world. But I sometimes feels like it comes up short because there's also moments of prayer that are a direct ask. There are moments of prayer that is, oh, why God? There's a lot of moments like that.
Yeah. 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 That's so true, because prayer can be lament, and prayer can be praise, and prayer can be begging and pleading. And yeah. And I mean, if I were going to be more theologically sophisticated, I said I would say something like, we're allowed the dignity of the participation of God's action in the world, something like that. But sometimes I just pray because I believe that I am somehow beloved, and that my pain, that we worship a suffering God, and that our suffering is actually, weirdly, it is the very thing that draws God close to us. God's great A game is those who despair and are afraid. Man, God is so good at that. So close, so loving. And I believe that I can't possibly know when God will act. And so, I should probably just give it give it a go. But I do find prayer to be one of the hardest sort of theological bits about limited agency, is that we are, like in a high theological anthropology, like in a high account of what we could do, we should be able to ask, and then we hear and understand and recognize the response. And I just know that I ask because I am not a deist, and I don't believe in a closed world. I just know God can. But I had this terrible, horrible moment the other day with have you met Jerry Sitzer? He's like he's delightful. He's like a professor of theology at Whitworth, and he wrote this book that a lot of people read called something like it was like a play on the severe mercy kind of. It was something like A Grace Disguised, I think it was. And he was telling the story of when his mom and his wife and his daughter died in the same car accident in which he was. And so for a lot of people, for many, many mainliners, he is the shorthand for catastrophic grief. And we were talking the other day, and we were kind of talking about this sort of like, there's no cure for being human, kind of, there's no formula, there's no prayer, there's no button, and I was with him because I believe that's my argument, but it's like both of our arguments, but I was kind of like, yeah, but like, kind of, wouldn't a cure for cancer sort of like fix my problems? I mean, not to be a jerk about it, but couldn't I just pray and then get healed? And then he said something terrible. He was like, oh, Kate, that the dirty little secret about miracles is that they don't last. And I was like, oh no, we still have to die in the end. And it was such a knowing that our finitude is somehow part of this story about prayer and miracles. I'm not always ready to say it, but it does help when somebody further down the road looks back at me and reminds me.
One of my former bosses used to say, 100 out of 100 of us will die. That is the one truth we all share. And same reaction. You're like, but if I
feel like we're not thinking about the outliers. Yeah.
Well, one of the parts of your book that I've read to people a couple times is the appendix. Normally, I don't get that excited about appendixes, but yours is short. And it makes me laugh every time. For those who haven't read it yet, it is cliches we hear and truths we need. And my favorite is things people say. So this is the cliche: let go and let God. A more complicated truth: God loves you, but won't do your taxes. I wondered if you had a favorite that you rewrote, and if there's a story behind it.
Thank you for asking. That is my ragiest. I mean, as a historian, I had to have an appendix, but it is the ragiest part of because I remember the first time I did it with Everything Happens for a Reason. I'm just going to hold it in my heart because the appendix is my favorite thing. I was so upset by something that someone had said that I sat there in a family gathering and created the appendix for that. So I have to admit, the one that comes to mind is when people said everyone is doing their best, which is something people say every time you're like, oh, wow, well, the hospital turned me away with like really tragic things. And everyone's like, everyone's doing their best. And so I was like, oh, the jury's still out on that. And it felt good not to have to say, just as a pious person, that 100% of all people at all times are doing their best. That feels unprovable.
I feel almost like the opposite is provable. I can guarantee that 100% of the time I am not doing my best. You only
Yeah.
need to survey one family member and they can vouch for that.
Yeah, we're the Calvinists on that one. You're totally
Yeah.
right. Yes. Yeah, I do love I love cliches because there's so much poured into our cultural calcifications of truths. And I think like when people kept saying nothing is wasted, they would say that as, you know, and for me who knew I would die before my child could remember me, all the sort of analogies about composting and things going into the ground, and as if there's some sort of like karmic world in which everything comes back. I just don't love being lied to. I needed someone Christian to say like things are lost. That's why we must believe that God ultimately holds our stories, because things are lost every day.
Yeah. Catherine just wrote in the chat the cliche,
Oh, yes.
God doesn't give you more than you can handle.
Wouldn't that be amazing, Catherine? Would
It
that
would
be
amazing.
wonderful math as you wake up every day and there's a divine calibration? Like, she seems tired. Like, he's up today.
Oh, those are my dream days. Have you had any more that you wish you'd added to the appendix of this publication?
Oh, I know. I think that the most common one, okay, because we're all Jesus-y here. I think it's kind of fun to just be honest about one of the great joys of having a book is you just get to go around arguing with people. And I think the most common arguments I get against like a Christian account of courage and hope is that being present is a solution to the problem of pain. And so is letting go of desire. It's a very neo-Buddhist, often Stoic account of that mindfulness and surrender and expectation is all the enemy. And I just find that wildly untrue. I think part of our account of sanctification is that God can shape our desires, but that we're never going to not be hungry, like hungry for love and connection and beauty and meaning. And I think that's how we know we're alive. But I'd say the most common thing people are like, so you're just saying be mindful? I was like, absolutely not.
No, in fact,
never. Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, preach it. Just like yes. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit. I just have to ask this. As I was reading your last chapter on finished cathedrals, there's so much wisdom and beauty there that we could just talk about that. However, you dropped a clause. You said, when we were in a faculty-led Leonard Cohen cover band. I just want to say, tell me more, and where can I find the videos?
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Anna. I really know that if you don't Google it, that you won't find an attempt of a young woman to get tenure who, when asked to do things, always said yes and played cello and sang backup for both a Bob Dylan cover band and a Leonard Cohen cover band. And there may or may not be video evidence. Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you. Look, theological education is a weird thing. I think we all know that we're not a big group and we have a lot of dreams and hopes. And anyone who's a boomer has a dream related to a guitar and that they want very much for other people to participate.
I played the viola, but the cello is my favorite string instrument.
So. Of course you did. I think we would duet very well.
Yes, we would. One of the most important, or one of the parts of No Cure for Being Human that I am grateful for is the chapter bucket list. where you talk about little deaths or moments of letting dreams go. I think what you were just talking about, is it okay if I read a few of your words?
Oh yeah,
to you?
please.
Is that, I always am like, is that weird?
No, it saves me from trying to remember what I said and then feeling dumb about it. So thank you.
You end the chapter with, I did not understand that when future comes at the exclusion of others. I had wanted 2 kids. I had wanted to travel the world. I had wanted to be the one to hold my mother's hand at the end. Everybody pretends that you only die once, but that's not true. You can die to 1,000 possible futures in the course of a single stupid life. Thank you for naming that. We are in a culture, I believe, where we do have rituals around death, the one death. We know how to do that to some extent, at least how to acknowledge that, but we don't have a lot of practices for those little deaths that you're talking about, the deaths of hope and dreams. And I wrestle with this all the time, and I even wrestled how to phrase my question, but I wondered, well, how do you think we should show up for family and friends in those moments of lost hope or little deaths? And are there rituals that you do?
Oh, yeah. Yes, because we have this very like new year, new you over and over again, endless limitless self. And so I have this podcast called Everything Happens, and we have 2 major kinds of people that we meet and love all the time. Is one, they're the experiencers of, or they're the deaths we're talking about are their own. The divorce, the diagnosis, the imagination for something that can never be, and then like the hunger of it. Then the other half, they're these people who are sort of having to give up, have these same deaths, but by proxy. They're either caregivers, they're caring for elderly parents or kids with precarious health or learning or all kinds of other dependents, or they're in professions that are very costly, like pastors and social workers and healthcare professionals, like things that demand that they care. And it requires them to constantly be putting aside their dreams and hopes and accept these tiny, incremental, endless sacrifices. And we don't have a lot of language for the people who like give their agency over to others, people who aren't endlessly fulfilling their own destinies. And I've heard of lots of people making rituals for those kinds of things. I've heard of people who are losing memory, who hold little funerals for a person they were, or they kind of hold little wakes. They throw petals into a river. They burn pieces of paper. They just get a group of friends who really know them around and split a bottle of wine and tell stories about who they were. And this is the bit that I need always, is but who they might yet be. It's because in my life, I lost so much so fast. And that's part of grief, is you have to let go faster than you're ready. And so much of the beauty of community and church and friends is that they like gather around you and mirror back to you a vision of yourself that you can't yet imagine. Like that feels to me like such love, even if it's little like bits of continuity, like, oh, you're so loving, or you're such a good question asker, or just little things. But man, if people can dream for us for a second, that to me kind of allows the funeral and the wedding kind of in the same moment.
That was a thin place. I'm the person who burns things. So I needed what you said also, the gathering and the storytelling and the dreaming of a future, or helping someone dream of that future, whatever it may be.
Because sometimes it's our youth, sometimes it's our friendships, sometimes it's a relationship that failed, because we're usually only about 5% in charge of whatever happens to us. So yeah, I find it's like the people who love us who we need the most to narrate what that's cost us, and then what what might yet be.
Mhm. I also saw it in your math teacher, I believe, who said like your B minus wasn't the death of your dreams or
Yes. I had this very angry math teacher named Mr. Booth, and he used to wear a lab coat, which I honestly thought was normal, but turns out it's not required of math teachers. But he used to use it so he could use his whole body to like wipe off the chalkboard. And it was, I didn't know until I was an adult how very funny that is and how he knew it was funny. And that he was so wonderful. He wrote me many undeserved letters of recommendation, but that part of watching him learn to try is that we have to keep rebooting over and over and over again, because we don't know, we never know how much we have in front of us, but we always know that we do need to be reinvented all the time.
Mhm, mhm. He was a wonderful character. I am supposed to,
Oh, yes.
I'm getting my chat verger. Thank you. Vergers are my favorite people, by the way. Um, I'll ask one more quick questions because I know there's many Minnesotans here since St. Mark's and
Yes.
some of my family showed up. Have you gotten to see the world's largest statue of Paul Bunyan in
Yes.
Bemidji?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Yes. And smallest. Thank you so much. Look, comma, Minnesota, comma. You have many, many large statues. Thank you. You have the Spam Museum. You have the largest stave church. Thank you. You have, I know, you have a lot of Norwegian stuff going on and a lot
Yep.
of Icelandic stuff. Yeah. Minnesota, Manitoba, Minnesota, North Dakota, almost all of your world's largest things I have cherished. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. I just want to make sure
Thank you. Thank
before we
you.
open it up. I could ask so many more questions. However, we have many, many people here, and I know that you also have questions. If you could type them into the chat, whatever you would like to ask Kate, and I will ask them. I know it always takes a few minutes for the chat to turn on, but whatever question you would like to ask, please put that in the chat now. And as you do, I wonder, do you have a favorite part of your own book?
Oh, I think I always cherish a moment where I can't believe I admitted it. Like in the first book, when I admitted that I had grabbed a surgeon by his collar and pulled him really close to my face and said, "I'd better not die looking into your eyes." It always feels, I always feel really lucky when I get to say something wild that felt. Yeah, but I think in this one, maybe my favorite chapter is the one about vocation, just about learning to see work as a gift and not just as an ambition, and how fun it is to write my dad, who is so inappropriate. And instead of saying, "I love you," he closes every conversation with, "I will follow your career with interest," which he has said since I was a child. So I really enjoyed writing him. It made me, it really helped me make sense of some things.
I loved your dad. He came across just as a dad everybody wants, who truly loves you and who is not always sure how to share that. Now my reading skills are
Yeah, speed reading.
having to come to, from Carol Carpenter. Kate, in everything happens, you say, "I must learn to live in ordinary time, but I don't know how." Have you found a way to live in ordinary time? If so, how do you do it?
Yeah, I think one of the, because the bad version is if we tell ourselves that we must transform every minute into a moment, and that's the way to live in ordinary time. And of course, we can't, because other people need to be fed, and we're still going to be stuck in traffic, and email still runs rampant in the earth. So taking that pressure off, but knowing that there is one, that the ordinariness of our lives, the sowing and reaping and dinner making and phone call stuff, like there is a sacredness to it. There's so many, but I do feel like the only thing I got good at is letting there be a moment that felt sticky, kind of like taffy like, where where something, and it's always an interruption that ruins the rest of my plans, but that there will be a moment every day that does really feel like a gift. And I see it because kids are so good at it, mostly because they're just natural procrastinators. But when I walk my son into school, there's always a moment where he tugs my hand back and he goes, "Oh, Mom, let's not waste our time." And he just means, because the bell's going, everybody's yelling for him to get inside. And he just means there's a second here. And it's true that it is the miracle. It usually happens once or twice a day, something which just makes you catch your breath. And that to me, I think is the best case scenario. It won't be 99% of the time, but if in those moments we allow ourselves to let a miracle pop up, something surprise us, then I think we've had just a little bit of transcendence that we need just to have the next ordinary day.
Thank you. And for the Episcopalians here, I always notice we love our calendar. And I admit I do love our calendar too. And we're getting to the end of ordinary time, which
good.
at this point feels like it will never end. So I needed that message as well.
That's so good. I love timekeepers. Some people are great at it. My dean, Edgardo at the Divinity School, he knows every saint for every day. And it is so annoying. He's like, today is the feast of the Smarga. And I'm just like, what is happening? But it's wonderful.
Yeah. You have another book coming out. We have a question about that.
Oh,
Can
yeah.
you say more?
Oh, sure. It was just it's a little series of kind of small reflections. I think I said 40-ish on the cover, but it's I think it's 40 and change of attempts to think about a life without perfection. I've always struggled with wanting so much to have ways to ground my belief, but not wanting to try to get back on the super achievement train that I was on before I got sick. So I was just joking, but I was like, what would a good enough faith look like? What if it was just a-okay? And so I'm just playing with different versions of how do you have spiritual disciplines, but you hold them loosely enough to kind of breathe with you. So some of it are little blessings, but it's kind of a attempt to render practical some of the things I've been trying to learn.
Thank you. And I love that, just the good enough faith. And I wondered how you've been shaped in your career by your diagnosis and then treatment and just life moving forward. How? Yeah.
I mean, I can't be the monster I would have been. I mean, it's not like I wouldn't pick it. Like, it's not out of virtue, but I can't be hyper productive because my body fails, and I can't be a perfectionist because things come undone. And so I think trying to have an account of like the goodness of our creatureliness, like the goodness of our finitude. It's not like a mistake that we just kind of fall unconscious for a third to a half of our lives if we're lucky. So I mostly write about the things I struggle with, which is that I want so much to find the formula for a day, to master my mornings and to really believe what the Peloton bike is telling me. But I'm trying to make peace with the fact that it will never, ever feel like enough.
That sounds like a lifetime of work.
Yes.
My Aunt Mary asks, as you went through your struggles, what did you count on to simply get through the hard times?
It was kind of a weirder answer than I thought. I thought it would be like my very good friends, which I picked and curated because they're better than other people, which they are. I thought it would be like a core set of things I already knew about myself, things I like, things I don't like, good friends. But the thing that got me through was mostly people I didn't pick. I don't have family who lives close by because I'm a foreigner, and I have had to rely on other people to fill in the gaps, financial gaps, because I couldn't afford my medical treatment, community. So the people that saved my life every day were like my librarian, who'd come pick me up at 4 a.m. to take me to the airport to get medical treatment. And in some other version, I would have felt like how sad to have to rely on all these sort of like little toothpicks kind of relationships. But in the end, that's been the biggest like vision of church I have, is that we really, if we lower our standards, in the nicest way, we can be carried. But it is a vision of interdependence I would not have chosen.
And what a beautiful vision. And I think I won't go back to your talk or your writing on the prosperity gospel and American dream and our need for dependence. There are so many questions now coming through. A couple people have asked in general, just if they could know a teeny bit about your blog, book club, and podcast.
Oh,
That's
sure.
not a big, it's a big question.
Yeah, one of the joys of what I do is that I get to write books. And so I have kind of not trying to not recommend my other books. If people really want a very historically specific book about the prosperity gospel, feel free to read Blessed. But I've got like the more kind of readable, popular books. And then, but mostly what I do is I have a weekly podcast with people where we try to kind of thread the needle on the question, how do you have truth and beauty and meaning in your life, but not always lessons and not always certainty? And you can't always do the math on, thank God I have this perspective. And so we talk to people about beautiful things they discovered in hard times without trying to make them add up. And so that has been, so this last week I talked to Richard Rohr, and hilariously next week I'll talk to Cindy McCain because she did public grief and it was so hard for her. And I was very interested. And then I think the last episode for the season is David Brooks. And it's like Malcolm Gladwell and lovely spiritual people. But all of it creates like a set of conversations about love and interdependence and community. And then I write blessings every week. So we have a lot of that at Kate C. Bowler on Instagram and stuff, and also at the website at katebowler.com. But we often, frankly, put together liturgical resources, especially for Advent. So we have this giant free Advent guide that's just daily reflections. My dad I feel like I'm saying this as an apology. My dad's a historian of Christmas, so I'm obsessed with Christmas. So it's like a long reflection about the season of hope. And then we'll do something again for Easter. So kind of a couple times a year, we put together congregational resources and resources for leaders and Christians of all kinds. And then the rest is available on my website. We just like making stuff for Christians and leaders and people who feel medium sad. Medium sad is kind of my jam.
And I can't recommend the podcast enough. It is a wonderful place. The one with Sesame Street. I forget her name now.
Oh yeah, Sherry West. Yes.
It was beautiful.
Turns out that Sesame Street is one of the most thoughtful articulators of how we can love and talk to our kids. Good job, Sesame Street.
Yeah. I was blown away. So I recommend the whole podcast.
I wanted to send like every youth pastor / family minister to be like, gosh, how can we do something cool with Sesame Street?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, we have a question from Christine that says, as a felon colon cancer club member, how are holding the hope of healing and health with the realities of ongoing unknowns and fears of what if? How do you live into the tension and not become a toxic positive person?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. And I think the cultural pressure moves toward aggressive futurism, toxic positivity. And I found that part of why I started writing in the first place is I was very quickly falling into that trap where I think mostly, especially because of a complicated medical system, is that we're rewarded for being the good and grateful patient. That's like the biggest prosperity gospel of them all. If I am just good, am I likable? I will audition for my care. And so I found it much easier to lie than to tell a hard truth, which is that I was scared and I was being roughly treated. So I think surrounding yourself with people who have a higher tolerance for honesty such a gift where people will say back to you things like, you're sad because this is a tragedy. You're angry because this is unjust, and you're tired because this is exhausting. Like those are good, not culturally rewarded things. But I think part of the problem is that we have, like, we don't have a lot of cultural language around the kind of uncertainty of a chronic condition. Is people love a problem that's fixed. And sometimes like people synthesize information so quickly that if you do have a problem that lasts more than 3 months, they are over it in a way that is horrifying. So I have found that to be a source of tremendous loneliness for me, that it's hard to it's hard to even find people to keep pace with a long-term tragedy. So that's my feeling of life as a chronic condition, just really. So I just want you to know how much I really hear the difficulty of that question. And part of it is allowing yourself a greater capacity for honesty, knowing that it will not be culturally rewarded, and finding a couple people that you can be more honest with than our society allows were huge resources for me when I was trying to practice telling the truth.
Mm, mm. Thank you. Thank you. So many really good questions. I apologize if I don't get to all of yours. Dana Gage asked, as a grieving mom, I found that deep suffering can create friends out of strangers and strangers out of friends. It's been a hard and wonderful distiller of some things. I wonder if you found the same to be true in your suffering.
Oh my goodness, Dana, what a beautiful, hard thing to say. I don't remember who it was. Maybe it was Nadia Bowles-Weber. Really early on, she said something like that pain can dig out of you something that then joy can fill, as if it was not like it was just no easy correlation between the sorrow of it and this incredible then capacity for joy and deep connection and intimacy. And the more that we have loved and lost, often the more we are changed and also deepened in our capacity to love. So there's no like if and then, or thank God I'm so glad that I learned. Just none of those things are true, except that there is something very strange about joy and sorrow, that they do not cancel each other out.
No, I think that's one of our other life works as humans, is how do we live with all of the emotions that we experience. Your title is perfect. No cure for being human.
And the fact that the publishers let me get away with it, I think they were like, oh, this one's really sad.
Yeah. I also, if I don't know if you can get the chat afterwards, there's a lot of praise coming in that I'm not going to be able to read in the time that we have left, but know that there is so much love there.
That's so kind.
A question from Ginny is, how did your suffering change your experience of shame?
Jenny, I'm going to give you a horrible answer. Because I didn't really see it until till the end of, I could only see it in rereading No Cure for Being Human, is that I felt tremendous shame in being the person who suffered. I was so embarrassed. I felt like I was like a living apology for how awful it was to love me and to bear the financial cost and the emotional cost of being an unsolvable person. And and so much of that came from having received such bad medical care for so long. I just felt so embarrassed. Like, why can't I piece this together? And I would not have named any of it as shame until I realized how much we can be made to feel like the bad thing when everybody else's life feels doable, or they have bounce. They have all these all these grief books. People just can bounce forward, and resilience. And so I think part of learning to be loved in being unsolvable has been one of the hardest things for me, because I think shame has been like an all too natural response
Mm.
for having the problems that persist.
Thank you for that honesty. And I don't trust anyone who writes a book bounce or there's a neat, tidy ending with a bow at the end. So
And my new book's going to be, I fixed it, exclamation mark. Nailed
I'll
it.
burn it
Yeah.
before I read it.
Hey, it's Katie Addisani. Hello, my friend.
Yeah.
Hey, thanks.
Who I'll go there
Oh,
because that's what
thanks.
popped
Just
up
because
on the
it's
chat.
my friend. Hey, sweetie.
She appreciates your work and says, I'm working on putting together a 6-week small group for my church that deals with faith and suffering. What do you think are some of the most important things for Christians who deal with chronic conditions, grief, and difficult diagnoses to come to terms with or understand?
Well, I think Katie knows that I secretly want her to answer that question because she is a scholar and also knows the themes of suffering and healing in the Christian tradition probably better than I do. So Katie, I'm going to give you like a poor approximation of the answer you would give. What are the most important things Christians who deal with this? Gosh, because so much of it is just the disease of these American theologies. Because anyone with a chronic, an unsolvable, a grief or a difficult or a chronic life cannot afford our individualism. We require community. We cannot afford our individualistic, non-structural thinking, because most of what changes our lives are actually not just hard work and character, but good policy, just financial structures, just like in my case, like an end to financial, to medical bankruptcy as a category. So I think mostly just foregoing our national character and accepting that the truth of the gospel is this long, hard story about hope, in which most of what carries us does not necessarily guarantee that ours will be the lives that are fixed in the way that we hoped. So yeah, it's such a strange version of like accounting for the deep suffering without glamorizing it at the same time. It is like tricky theological work.
Tricky theological work and as you said, deeply rooted in where we live and what are the problems with where we live.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many. I remember feeling that, I cannot feel your feelings, but just what would it have been like, because you're Canadian, to not qualify for some of our national assistance in healthcare?
Yeah.
We're all humans.
Yeah. I'll just boast about Katie here for a second, but like in the time when there was just nothing working out, I mean, the amount of being saved from someone who said, hey, I actually have experience helping solve medical error paperwork, and someone just like volunteered to help me make some HR calls, to lovely Katie here, who made adorable little washcloths for my totally smushy baby son that looked exactly like the tractors that he loved, and just like put them in the mail. Like nobody needs to have, there's no like, what can I do for people that are suffering? It's the answer is anything that brings joy. And in this case, it was tractor cloths.
Thank you. I also think you answered a question that I did not get to. What do you say? What do you do when people suffer?
Because it's just presence. I mean, true, like not in it's presence and courage to not turn away, and also just to not imagine we're going to solve, like truly. I never imagined that the person next to me was supposed to answer the problems of a theodicy or cure cancer, but I knew when they were scared of me, and I knew when my pain made them uncomfortable. So just being that loving, shining face was always the gift I needed.
I hear you also in saying continue to show up. So few do.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, and I forget. One thing I try to do is like put it on a calendar. If you know you're going to forget 6 months from now, just put ask Jen about blank. And then just remind yourself to be the friend, the chronic person, because we just naturally forget.
Mhm. I have the same anniversary as my husband's birthday, which solves a problem for me.
Yes.
Remembering those days, they're all the same.
That's good.
So I'm with you in the put it all on the calendar anniversaries. I just got the reminder. I could keep asking questions and keep talking to you forever. And I apologize if I didn't get to your question in the chat. Malene has just reminded me that it is time to turn it over to Lucy. So thank you, Kate. It has been just a joy to spend an hour with you.
Oh, my word.
I am better because of it. It feels like a thin space. So
Oh, what
thank
a
you.
joy. Thank you, my dear. Oh, Lucy, I think your sound is off. It always does that to me. Oh, you're working on
Okay, there we go.
it. Yay.
Anna, I totally agree. I wish y'all could just keep on talking and asking these great questions and hearing these just beautiful, thoughtful answers. But thank you both for just so generously sharing yourselves with us tonight. We are going to now have a very quick and easy contest so that somebody can win a book that we'll arrange to have sent to you, Kate, and then sent back to them so it can be personalized. So there,
Perfect.
Elaine is going to post a question in the chat box, and the very first person to answer it correctly will be the winner, and then I'll tell them what to do. So.
I know this answer. I can't win. Oh.
This is so sweet.
Okay, so Malene, who's our winner? Malene, SK Pepper. So SK Pepper is the winner, and if you will send your contact information to Catherine Bissett, who's our EBA Executive Director. Her email is director@episcopalbooksellers.org, and she'll coordinate getting the book back and forth. Director@episcopalbooksellers.org. So on behalf of the Episcopal Booksellers Association, I would like to thank Kate and Anna again for their wonderful conversation, and thank everybody who made this evening possible, especially Rachel Rokiki and Stacy Yu from Random House, Harriet Putnam from Team Everything Happens, and the good people at St. Mark's Cathedral in Minneapolis. Thanks to everybody who came tonight for being here and for supporting Episcopal bookstores, which support authors and ministries across the country. So Kate, will you close our time together with one of your blessings?
I would love to.
Okay.
All right, my darlings. I picked a blessing for when there's no cure, for being human. All right. God, I feel it again. The burden of being human and the fact that nothing will exempt us from the pain of it. Blessed are we, your human creatures, with mind and soul and spirit, bounded in flesh and bone, struggling in the seeming conspiracy against progress, against the perfection that our minds can grasp and our hearts long for. God, how we yearn for the completion of all things. And we try, oh, how we try to hurry it along with our self-help elixirs, slurries with the touch of truth and the handful of goodness, enough to be effective for a while. The gospel of hustle or of positivity or Peloton. But then life happens and we realize all over again that we are human, frail, and finite, and that there is no cure for that, despite illusory promises that say otherwise. This is where we live, in this reality. Come help us in our humanity. Help us enjoy all the beauty that is here, the sweetness that comes to us unbidden, the light that gives us eyes to see. It is not all up to us. Thank heaven. Amen.
Amen. Thank
My
you.
ears. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Anna.